Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online conversation. Today, we are welcoming John Hoskins Aberhall, Winfred Shearer, and Alex Hoskins Aberhall from Bullfrog Films, a distributor with which the Global Peace Film Festival has had a happy working relationship for years. Please join us now in welcoming John, Winnie, and Alex. Thank you.
Well, welcome, John, Winnie, and Alex will be joining in a little while. But just want to start with saying that we've programmed numerous Bullfrog titles over the years. And then we've also watched numerous films we have programmed that were picked up for distribution by Bullfrog. We've been honored to be working with you over the years. So tell us about Bullfrog Films. Tell us about your history and anything else you want to say.
Well, history is a long history. Bullfrog turns 50 next year. And before that, we were in the business because we started off at Rodale Press, which is, roughly speaking, responsible for the whole natural foods and health consciousness, health food stores, etc., in the US. And we made films for them. We started off as filmmakers. We were there, well, I think they had 2 film divisions. We were certainly the first film division. And we made 5 films before they decided to go in another direction, shall we say. They thought they were a magazine publisher and they thought film would be a good idea. And they found out that filmmaking and film distribution is a lot more difficult than they think. So we were left thinking, now what should we do with our lives? And decided that we would try and become filmmaker distributors, meaning that we would make films, and from the distribution of those films, we would make enough money to make other films. This was not a practical solution, it turned out, because it's extremely difficult to do either job well, and to try and do both jobs well is complicated. So we started Bullfrog Films as a distribution company, and with that idea, and we did continue making films for the first 7 or 8 years of Bullfrog before we decided lots of other people are making great films. Because when we started, really, the environmental films were didn't really have a place in the curriculum, so they weren't very saleable. And so, but eventually people caught on, the environmental movement caught on in a big way, and filmmakers follow. Whenever there's a good issue to follow, they follow it. And so lots of filmmakers started making environmental films, and we decided we would just become a distribution company. And so that's what we've been doing ever since. Do you want to say something, Winnie?
Good. Yeah, the focus has changed over the years. I mean, there were times when everybody wanted a film about nuclear power, then that was not a good thing. Everybody wanted a film about nuclear weapons, then that was not good. The librarians all had their AIDS film, so you had to move on from that. The times changed. We've always looked for the connections between issues. We don't see humans as separate from the natural world. We don't see social justice as separate from climate justice. And so things that cross those barriers always interest us and help people expand their understanding of issues. So we did focus heavily on classroom education at the beginning. Back in the day when public libraries had nonfiction film collections, we had a lot of 16 millimeter going into libraries. And then we shifted to colleges as our main focus. And that way, actually, with our making connections with different disciplines, it gave us a broader audience for a film. So we weren't like pigeonholed in one discipline. course, so the pandemic made some big shifts in what librarians and colleges were asked to deliver for their faculty, and we tried to accommodate them. At the same time, we had a community screening site that we built called Bullfrog Communities, trying to enhance the public performance use of films, to get communities resources to show films. We provide posters and press stills and discussion questions and things to help communities have events. And that changed a lot. Where's Alex gone? Is he around?
Yes, he's gone upstairs.
Okay.
Well, before we, because I do want to get into, how technology may have changed things and times have changed things. Winnie, if you wouldn't mind, I wanted to kind of go back to when you were talking about the different topics changing over time. I think one of the things that stands out, whether you're a festival or you're a distributor, is you have a kind of editorial eye or vision, but you're also in conversation, right, with the people who the audiences, the teachers, the librarians. So how have you, what have been the things that you've learned or that have surprised you over, and congratulations, by the way, for all these years of, of the decades of having this robust conversation with audiences and librarians. What are the things that have surprised you and that you've learned along the way?
Well, several, I mean, lots of different levels of things. One is if you have if you put a grim image on a video jacket, it's not as likely to be picked off the shelf, or it's just people like smiling faces. World's going to hell. Whoopee. I don't know. So making things accessible, making things have a connection with people that you can do something, is something that we've tried to find avenues into big issues. And in fact, I think sometimes the films that show people that their connection to a big issue are most successful. Not that you recycling is going to fix the fossil fuel problem, but it just gets people conscious and involved. So that's something we've learned.
That's that's a big thing for us as well, as making sure that no matter how large the issue may be, that we find a space for people to have a sense of urgency, for people, or I'm sorry, not urgency, but agency, for people to have a sense that that there are small and large things, and we need all of those things working together. But it's important. I think the consciousness is very important. And then, in terms of how things have changed, just I started in the film business back in the 90s, and it's been an incredible series of format changes, going, as you mentioned, from 16 millimeter to D2 to, everything in between, all of the kinds of formats that have come and gone. What must that be like, not only in terms of just making sure that you are paying attention to the physical technology, the deliverables, but also how it impacts the way you think audiences interact with the material?
Yeah, I remember in the early 90s wondering, were DVDs or streaming going to come first? And DVDs became very established, and there still are librarians who feel that they need to have that thing in their hand, in their library, in their possession, and not just access. So what was the rest of that question?
Well, so in terms of, because I think about this a lot, when I think the very first time, John, that I had a conversation with you, I was an acquisitions person at the Independent Film Channel. And the thing that I would spend a lot of time and care because it was my particular job at the channel, to program the films that would give our channel a film festival feel. So I would buy from independent, I would, feature directors from small distributors, as compared to the majors. And also I got to, my favorite part was getting to buy the shorts from film students and getting, and over the decades, seeing their careers blossom and seeing them direct other things. But there was always this sense of, I would have these wonderful conversations with filmmakers, wonderful conversations with distributors about, a particular film, and we would put it up on the channel. And because of the nature of, of any kind of broadcast, you don't know how it lands. You don't know what people think, especially since we were the independent film channel at that time was not a channel that was that participated in the ratings. So we, in terms of buying that information. So we were really just programming, and there was this sense of how does it land? How is it different? I know there were films that I would buy specifically for TV because I felt they were actually better served by the experience, the intimacy of being in your own house and watching, a kind of intimate or more relatable kind of film, rather than say a more cinematic experience where a big screen or the kinds of sound effects that you can get in a theater are needed to give you the full sense of the experience. So I do think that technology, I guess what I was getting at is that technology is certainly an issue to be dealt with from a logistics standpoint. Do you have the right, do you have the right technology? But audiences also interact with each different technology differently. I think it's amazing that you say the librarians, some of them still want the DVDs because it's a sense of they really actually have something in their collection, as opposed to just having a title somewhere in pixels.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the format and the technology make a lot of difference to the distribution, obviously, because with 16 millimeter film, we were selling, single print for $850. And if you wanted to see that film as a teacher in a school district, you would have to book it, months in advance, maybe the beginning of the school year, for the regional media center to send the van out so that you could watch the film and your students could watch the film. So that was pretty difficult. As soon as VHS came in, then there was a rush to maybe we should drop the prices. And then because, it had now become a consumer item, you could just buy a VHS, you could go to Blockbuster, rent one. And so we fell under that spell and dropped our prices. And when we thought we were going to sell, instead of one print to Penn State University, 16 millimeter print, we would sell one VHS. So it really, that did not change. And then, of course, Laserdisc was a whole other kind of, that was very, yeah, beautiful images, but really not consumer oriented. So really DVD, of course, very consumer oriented, but not, not a great improvement in picture quality for one thing over 16 millimeter, although the cameras were getting better. So it's really been streaming that's upset the apple cart completely, because now all of a sudden everybody can see it. I mean, a teacher doesn't have to, 20 minutes is no longer the length that the conventional wisdom said was the length for particularly high schools, where you could have questions before the film, questions after the film in an hour-long period. And even in colleges, an hour-long film was the thing. And then Sundance all of a sudden changed the whole thing. Gave independent filmmakers delusions of grandeur that it's going to be in theaters, so everything has to be 90 minutes or 75 minutes, which kind of ruled it out of classroom use. But
Right.
With streaming, of course, now all the instructor has to do is says, I want you to watch this film by next week. And then we can talk about different parts. So length and format has made a big difference. And streaming has really broadened the usage. No longer the van going out to the school district. Anyone can just say, I want to watch that because it's in the library, or I have access to the library.
And I think faculty comfort with a new medium is one of the hurdles. And VHS was comfortable at home before they started using it in classrooms, and the same with streaming and DVDs and then streaming. And but streaming happened so quickly that it really took off. Our community screening site became a virtual screenings as well as a DVD shipped to you site. And that's how it's been for the past 2 years now.
So then you mentioned earlier that in the earlier days of Bullfrog, that you were more oriented on to school as your target audience, and maybe there's a type of film that fits better for someone in a classroom as opposed to someone on a Saturday night still wanting to get engaged in an issue. So has that changed the type of film that you are acquiring?
Well, the whole industry has changed a lot because I guess you could say it started in the 1930s, the educational film business with McGraw-Hill and Encyclopedia Britannica. And they made strictly instructional films like Simple Levers and Pulleys. And then in the 60s, there was drug and sex education, and everybody had to have, you couldn't have a drug film older than 2 years or kids couldn't relate to it because the hair was different. And sex education, but all of that in terms of social issue documentary, that has really come on. And it would, as Winnie said, it was sort of standard fare in public libraries in the 60s that you could watch 16mm documentaries. But now, what happened in the education market was the K-12 market became very centralized around 2 or 3 big distributors, and it's still that way. And their funding has been much more strongly cut than the higher education budgets. And so that's made a big difference. We're still going back to the K-12 market, because there is a market there, but universities and colleges are much more stable, but they're not very stable anymore, but they're more stable.
Yeah. And when the VHS or when streaming came in for schools, at that point, you had to have a big server to serve all those classrooms that you were serving in your district, and not many school districts had that. So the companies that succeeded in trying to corner that market were providing software packages and training the teachers of how to push the button, and so it was an awkward learning curve for the school districts and the faculty. So now that streaming is so available, there's an avenue in again. So we'll see.
We'll see. Well, so maybe this is a good time then to bring Alex in and talk about the future.
All right.
Because
Alex,
it's right around the corner, as I've always been told.
Yes. Yeah, we're very committed to trying to expand the use of film by communities, be it churches or activist groups. And Alex basically set that up for us. Here's Alex.
Welcome, Alex.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
So you are our man of the future. So
Well, I like to think the present too, but
indeed. So tell us about this transition. We've heard wonderful stories about the past of Bullfrog, but what are you planning for? What are you putting in place today, and how do those things work towards your flexibility for meeting the future?
Well, that's a difficult question. But maybe let's start with where we are.
Okay.
So streaming obviously is the name of the game right now. And so Bullfrog has turned lots of its efforts to building up its academic streaming platform. Clearly, the academic market is a bit unstable, but again, much more stable than most other markets right now. And so what the revolution was, what came into play when streaming really came into play, was the accessibility. And so now, everybody can access the film, not only in class, but off campus, or at their home, wherever, but, either in class or as an assignment, or for use in research, et cetera, et cetera. But that accessibility has also sort of lent itself to the sort of data-driven understanding of film and video, which has made it a bit difficult for us to get our arms around what that means. And that, by us, I mean the entire sort of distribution business. And so in other words, if in the past, a university would just buy a film, buy a DVD, and it'd be shown in class, and the cost was what the cost was, and so much royalty would go back to the filmmaker. But now, if a university just buys that film for 1 year or 3 years, then similarly that cost goes right back to the filmmaker. But most universities want a collection. They want access to as much as they can get their arms around. And so how do you monetize that fairly so everybody receives what they're due, essentially? And so it is a sustainable business. And so that's sort of the connection between now and the future. And so that's what we've been actively trying to sort out. And I mean, that's industry wide. So for instance, if you show a film in a classroom now, if it's part of a collection, that film may be absolutely integral to that class, but and that teacher may think that it's so important that he wants to or she wants to have that experience where everybody's watching together in person and in real time, so they have that real sort of depth of understanding that comes when you're in a room together, and a kind of deeper discussion that way. But that only shows as one hit, one play. And so another teacher who wants a film as part of the class, maybe the film isn't as integral to the class, but assigns it for homework. And so they get many more hits. And all of a sudden, to the librarian administrator or the electronic resources administrator that's now in charge of said budgets, they see that as more important film maybe than the one that was only hit once. So maybe they decide that they want to choose that one later as part of a longer term purchase. So, and for us and the filmmaker, that also sort of skews the royalty towards the film that was quote unquote used more. So there have been a number of different models that streaming platforms have used to deal with that. And what we've sort of fallen into, I should say, or maybe discovered, is evidence-based acquisition. And that's also used by a number of electronic book publishers, I believe, as well, maybe some journals, where a company actually has access or licenses access to a number of journals or ebooks. And so what happens with that is you help a librarian to fill a couple mandates and give your professors an opportunity, or give professors an opportunity to use what's important to them, and also return as much as you can to the filmmaker. And with that, essentially what you're doing is you're opening up access to the entire collection. And so we do it so every film in the collection gets some revenue for that. And then if it's watched more, it receives a little bit more. And if what's watched, it receives a little bit. If it's watched a little bit longer, it receives a bit more. And then also length is a consideration. But after the end of this 1 year or 3 year, what they call evidence-based period, the university library then selects the films that they want to keep. So that way, the library is able to develop their collection, and they are allowed to use a number of different factors to make their decisions about what they want to keep. So they can go to that professor and say, maybe this only had one hit, but is this something that you really need for your class? And so some of the usage comes into play in terms of the subscription, the collection subscription, But then ultimately the choices that the faculty or the librarian makes are entirely up to them, and they get input from faculty. And as opposed to some other models, they know what they're paying up front. We do all the allocations. So it's a way that films that are chosen still get that that revenue that they need to sustain the filmmaker and ultimately the distribution business in general. But everybody gets something as being part of it, and the university having access to it. So that's sort of one area where we've pushed into is model development. And so now with the pandemic, there's been obviously a huge increase in the amount of streaming versus hard copy use. And what's become evident to me is that streaming is all about access, clearly, but DVD or hard copy or local copy is still primary for public performance. So I think that was discovered by some universities too. They realized that, you know, if you still want to have that feeling of being in person, that deeper understanding that comes from again being in the same room and watching the film, and that still has its place. But streaming is also integral to make sure that you have access, particularly if you can't be on campus. So that's accelerated all kinds of authentication schemes that make that a much smoother process. So we've taken on some of that too. For instance, there's a technology called single sign-on. So a user, a librarian, a student, faculty at a university can sign in once to electronic resources and then have access to everything that the library has. So that's something that we've become part of too. But there are a number of different authentication schemes that we're using that way too.
There's a lot more burden on the distributor to stay up with the developments in technology that
Correct.
serve the librarians.
Correct. And then also we, for communities and for big campus events, we created a virtual screening platform and virtual screening options. So one is usually using basic streaming technology and just giving people access, communities or campuses access for a certain time, and then helping them set up post-screen discussions. And then the other part is actual events where you can watch together and chat together in real time to sort of mimic that theater going experience, that in-person experience. So in that case, what we do is we live stream to an audience, and we have these tools to also not only permit all of the users to chat during the event, but then to have a discussion afterwards. And so we can bring in feeds into the live stream and have a panel discussion, or we can very easily connect out to something like Zoom, where people are more comfortable with for group discussions. So that has worked quite well. Now, I would say in the education space, we also think that might be a good idea to mimic. So if you can't be in person and you don't want to just assign this to your students, maybe you do want to have a virtual classroom. So that's something that we're considering putting into place among a number of other ideas. But so there's the technological challenges. And then there's also the revenue challenges, and they're not mutually exclusive necessarily, but they present their own problems. But we're finding the solutions are also pretty entwined though. So when we figure out one thing, we're solving other problems often. So but generally we're looking to get as many eyes on the films as we can. And so we recognize that whether it's a film festival or a public screening in person, a virtual event, a classroom screening, or if you're just watching it on your own, the ways that we can engage you as much as possible are what we're trying to do. And so whether that's getting your eyes on the film initially, or telling people that already have access to the film that it's there, or just encouraging that discussion when everybody is there, and really, trying to create that change through public education, formally or not.
And the Bullfrog communities actually
Mhm.
open you up to a lot more local or grassroots organizations and things like that to watch, to take advantage of all the work that you've done in the educational community to expand your audiences beyond that educational community, correct?
Yes, it did.
And that was something we started several years ago with DVDs. And the pandemic made the development of the virtual events happen within a couple of weeks. And so that was developed here. It's given people the ability to keep going during the pandemic, but I think people are looking forward to getting back in the same room together. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays, because there's so many issues that we need to deal with in this country and around the world, that it's nice to have a flexible delivery system now.
And that's what it's really about, is about flexibility and being able to serve as many viewers and hosts and customers as you can. We don't want to have to say, well, we can't do that to anybody. So when an opportunity arises, we want to be able to fulfill that need, or yeah.
Well, when I looked at the Bullfrog website, I was amazed at the number of films that are in your current releases that we have shown, that we've shared with our audiences at the Global Peace Film Festival. So can you talk about some of the films that are currently in release, just sort of give people watching this a taste of that? And also, how can our audience support your work in getting these films out in the world?
Want to come back in, Johnny? We submitted quite a few films to you guys this year. We don't know which ones will be there this year. What do we have?
Well, we have quite a lot of new films, and ones on the way. So one, for instance, that really is.
There's one
Sorry.
film in particular that I had gotten a chance to see at the Reading Film Fest, Into the Canyon. That it's a beautiful film, and that's sort of the film I had in mind when I had asked the question about the different audiences. That doesn't feel like a traditional educational film. That
Right.
does feel like a film that on a Saturday night for entertainment purposes,
Mhm.
I, as a person who still would like to engage with serious issues and topics, would sit down and watch that and not feel as if it's an educational experience, although there would be a lot that I would take away from it.
Right. And so, I mean, you try and find your niche with all of these films. So, we all of that is part of the consideration and the judgment when you acquire them. So, so for that film, obviously that was a big reason why we took that film, is that
It's beautiful.
well, it's beautiful, and it's sort of big picture stuff told in a way that is accessible for a lot of audiences.
Well, it has a wonderful story. It has an adventure, and
right.
There's another film about the first solar flight around the world that
Mhm.
has the same kind of wonderful adventure. Once you're through with it, you realize, oh, there's a whole world of technological development with the sun that we haven't even begun. And so you're getting that message, but at the same time, you're really getting a wonderful, entertaining story. And I think Into the Canyon has that same attribute, that you want to preserve this canyon. You have to care about water. So
When I looked at your website, I'm looking at featured releases on your website, and 4 of the 7 films you've listed there, we've actually shown in the Global Peace Film Festival in previous years.
not surprising.
Yeah, I mean, we're such fans of yours.
Which films are you referring to?
Let me tell you. Power to Heal, we had.
That's a very important film.
Actually, we got that from you, but most of these you picked up after, after we'd screened them, not because we screened them, but necessarily, but after. The True Cost, The Providers, which wasn't in the festival, but was a special screening that we did, and The Third Harmony.
Third Harmony, yeah.
Oh, and
I think the filmmaker submitted that one.
Yeah, Chris Farina, Seats at the Table is an amazing.
It is, yes.
Right, and so they were all effective in different ways.
Right.
True Cost is definitely been one of our more popular films over the past several years, and that's about fast fashion and sort of the acceleration of the environmental health effects by sort of having no seasons anymore in fashion. There's no fall and spring season. I mean,
and that's a film that again is accessible to people, that they are connected to the bigger problem.
Exactly.
The choices you make affect other people and the environment.
Right.
And
So sort of the sweatshop model and acceleration, but it's also talking about something that people, can feel like they can make choices about in their daily lives and have an effect.
And has that positive message, yeah.
Right. And then there's something like Power to Heal, which is sort of an unknown history to a lot of people, but that it's so important in terms of sort of the social movements that are happening in terms of single payer healthcare. Most people don't know the story of basically segregation in hospitals and how that was essentially changed overnight. I mean, obviously that
not completely, but
not completely by any means, but in that place and time when
Medicare was passed.
Right, when federal funds to hospitals was suddenly under threat, and the serious work of activists to make change, that really changed things overnight and had an incredible effect on our country and in terms of healthcare and steps towards equality.
And then on your newest releases, 2 films that we had in the festival last year are listed. Can You Hear Us Now? And No Time to Waste, The Urgent Mission of Betty Reed Susskind.
Which is a very beautiful film about, she deals with racism so easily.
Such a wonderful story.
Speaking her history, that it became part of the national parks revamping of itself to be inclusive.
And patriarchy as well.
And patriarchy, yeah.
It hits so many, it hits so many things.
And all in our easy flowing style of just speaking to people where they are. An incredible person, and such a powerful film because of her.
And sometimes we have a new film called Crime in a Bayou that's in the middle of an impact campaign right now, that looks at the history of a Supreme Court case of a young man getting arrested and prosecuted just after Brown v. Board of Education went in the South, and the young Jewish attorney who went there and worked with him all the way to the Supreme Court to, the bravery of standing up for yourself and saying, no, I didn't do that. I have a right to, it gave everybody in the country a right to a trial by jury because of that case. So, it shows you how history is still relevant. And how important it is to stand up when it's your toe or foot that's being stepped on. and how brave somebody, a Black man in the South, a young man, was to do that. And that's been buzzing around bar associations and law schools, and it's a very powerful film, a history film.
Yeah, history, law, the court case is
Mm.
incredibly important for
Yeah.
legal history. But also,
oh,
so
sorry.
I was going to say it also, it gets to sort of the arbitrary nature of oppression. You sort of never know when that awfulness is coming.
Yeah, that's what's oppressive about it, is that it could whack you at any moment. It's not the organization of the impending, but it's the uncertainty of when your life could be transformed instantly, as we've seen often in communities where police shoot someone for no good reason. That hasn't changed.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. Well, and this is why there has been such a wonderful relationship between our two organizations, because we have so much in common in terms of the big ideas that we're sharing, and we want to get out, and we so want to support and salute your work in doing that, because this has been eye-opening to listen to all of the challenges that you've been rising to, and so we really appreciate the insights that you've given us. I think anyone who watches this will also come away with a much deeper picture of what it means to distribute films, against this current backdrop. So thank you very much for taking your time and sharing your insights.
Well, thank you for hosting us. And I didn't mention that we also have an SVOD site called Ovid TV,
Yes.
which makes these films accessible to people at home. So that's another way that we're trying to branch out. So thank you for.
Yes, so Bullfrog films are accessible from Bullfrog, of course, and then on DocuSeek for academic streaming, and then Ovid TV for personal use. But yeah, thank you so much for including us in this and for screening many Bullfrog films over the years. I think we're united in our desire to see change happen, and hopefully screening these films can be a part of that.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Alex. And thank you,
You're welcome.
everyone who listened to this particular Glow. Please be sure to go to bullfrogfilms.com to look at their website and to get connected to those other services. And also, please remember that the 20th Global Peace Film Festival Incarnation will roll out this September. The in-person screenings begin September the 19th and run through the 25th. And then we will have a week of virtual access beginning September 26th and ending October 2nd. All of that information will be rolling out through our social media channels, but please do go to our website, peacefilmfest.org, for more details. Thank you again, and we'll see you at the next Glow.
Thank you.